Beneath the frost-kissed moon, a single drop of blood etched the Omega's fate into the eternal snow. Lysen Crow had always known the weight of rejection, like the chill that seeped into her bones long before the first exile. Born under a harvest moon in the shadowed valleys of the Frosthelm territories, she was an Omega whose hands hummed with the Deuce's quiet mercy, a healer whose touch could mend flesh torn by claw and fang. But mercy, in a world of alphas and wars, was a fragile thread, easily severed. Her pack, the Ironclaws, had revered her once, whispering of her gift as a sign from the lunar spirits. Yet reverence curdled into suspicion when her powers faltered against the unyielding grip of a wasting curse that claimed the life of Elder Thorn, the pack's revered seer. "You are no savior," the Alpha of the Ironclaws had snarled, his eyes gleaming like polished obsidian under the cavern's torchlight. The air reeked of damp stone and smoldering herbs. The remnants of her failed ritual scattered across the altar like accusations. Lysen's fingers, still stained with the Elder's blood, trembled as the pack's howls rose in judgment. Banished under the blood moon's crimson gaze, she was cast out into the whispering peaks, where the wind carried the ghosts of forgotten oaths. No mate claimed her, no kin followed. She was adrift, a shadow among the evergreens bowed by perpetual winter. The mountains rose like jagged teeth against the indigo sky, their peaks dusted in snow that fell in relentless veils, muffling the distant weavos of rival packs. Lysen trudged through the drifts, her breath fogging the air in ragged bursts, the cold gnawing at her threadbare cloak. Her boots crunched over frozen earth, each step a reminder of the void within. Her gift, once a warm pulse in her veins, now flickered like a dying ember. The Deuce's favor had abandoned her, or so the pack's curses echoed in her mind. What use was an Omega healer who could not heal her own exile? Night deepened, the moon swelling full and silver, casting the landscape in ethereal light. Lysen sought shelter in a narrow ravine, where ancient pines clawed at the rock face, their needles whispering secrets to the wind. She kindled a small fire with flint and tinder, the flames dancing tentatively against the encroaching dark. The warmth was fleeting, a brief defiance against the isolation that wrapped her tighter than any chain. She drew her knees to her chest, tracing the faint scar on her palm, a mark from her initiation rite, a crescent moon etched in silver thread, symbol of her bond to the Deusa. It had been her anchor, now it felt like a lie. The wind shifted, carrying the metallic tang of blood and the low growl of pursuit. Lysen's senses sharpened, the Omega instinct coiling in her gut like a serpent. She doused the fire with snow, plunging the ravine into shadow and pressed against the icy wall. Footsteps echoed, not the heavy tread of wolves, but the labored gait of one hunted. A figure stumbled into view, cloaked in a mantle of midnight fur, his form silhouetted against the moonlit snow. He was broad-shouldered, regal even in collapse, but blood darkened the snow at his feet, trailing like a crimson ribbon. Darian Frosthelm, Alpha King of the Northern Realms, collapsed to one knee mere paces from her hiding place. His armor, etched with ancient runes of frost and fury, gleamed dully under the lunar glow, but a gash across his side wept freely, staining the white drifts red. Assassins, shadowy figures cloaked in black, their blades glinting with the forbidden sheen of silver, closed in from the ridge above. Silver, the bane of alphas, forged in the fires of betrayal to pierce the heart of royalty. Darian's eyes, a storm gray that mirrored the gathering clouds, scanned the darkness, fierce and unyielding despite the pain etching lines into his face. Lysen's heart thundered, a wild drum in the silence. She should flee. Omegas did not meddle in the wars of kings, yet the scent of him, pine and iron, mingled with the sharp bite of his wound, stirred something primal, a pull as inexorable as the tide. He rose, sword drawn, the blade singing through the air as he met the first attacker, Steel clashed against silver, sparks flying like fallen stars. But they were three, swift and venomous. Their movements a deadly dance under the moon's watchful eye. The leader lunged, his silver dagger arcing toward Darian's throat, aimed to end the line of Frosthelms in one poisoned stroke. Time fractured. Lysen moved without thought, her body propelled by an instinct deeper than fear. She burst from the shadows, intercepting the blade with her own forearm, the silver bit deep, searing like liquid fire through vein and sinew. Pain exploded, white-hot and blinding, as the metal's curse invaded her blood. She cried out, the sound raw and animal, collapsing beside the king as the assassins recoiled, their faces masks of shock beneath hoods. Darian whirled, his sword cleaving the air, felling two in a blur of fury. The leader fled into the night, swallowed by the storm. Panting, the Alpha King dropped to her side, his hands, calloused from battles won and lost, pressing against the wound. Blood welled between his fingers, her blood warm and vital, soaking the snow. "Why?" he rasped, his voice a gravelly thunder, eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that pierced the haze of agony. Lysen gasped, the world tilting as darkness edged her vision. The silver's poison spread, a cold fire unraveling her from within. Her gift, her essence, faded, slipping away like smoke through clenched fists. She had saved a king, but at what cost? In that moment, under the moon's indifferent gaze, rejection bloomed anew, not from pack or fate, but from the blade that now defined her scar. The wind howled, carrying her faint whisper into the void. Mercy's price was etched in silver. The snow fell heavier now, a relentless shroud that buried the echoes of battle in its white embrace. Lysen's world narrowed to the throb of her arm, where the silver's bite pulsed like a second heart, devouring the warmth she had once wielded as her gift. She lay there in the ravine, the king's hands still pressed to her wound, his touch a strange anchor amid the unraveling. Darian's face hovered above her, etched with shadows that the moonlight sharpened into something almost divine. Fierce brows furrowed, jaw clenched against his own pain. His scent enveloped her, that wild blend of pine resin and forged steel cutting through the coppery reek of blood. Why had she moved? The question lingered in his storm-gray eyes. But she had no words, only the fading echo of instinct, a pull from the Deusa's unseen threads. "We cannot stay," he murmured, his voice low and commanding, laced with the gravel of exhaustion. He tore a strip from his cloak, binding her arm with swift, practiced motions, the fabric soaking through almost instantly. The pressure burned, but it stemmed the flow enough to let her vision clear. Around them, the night pressed in, the assassins' retreat a temporary mercy. Their howls would summon more, drawn by the king's blood trail like wolves to a fresh kill. Darian scanned the ridgeline, his free hand gripping his sword's hilt, every muscle coiled for the next strike. Yet in that gaze, Lysen saw not just the warrior, but the weight he carried, the crown's invisible chains, the guilt of realms fractured by betrayal. With a grunt, he lifted her, his arm encircling her waist as if she weighed no more than a fallen branch. She stifled a gasp, the motion jarring her wound, sending fresh fire through her veins. Her body protested, weak from the silver's curse, but she leaned into him, the heat of his frame a stark contrast to the biting cold. They moved as one, slipping deeper into the ravine where the pines thickened into a natural labyrinth, their branches interlocking like the ribs of some ancient beast. The wind whipped at their backs, carrying the faint, distant baying of pursuers, silver-wielders from the rival Stormridge clan, whispers said, hungry for the throne's vacancy. Hours blurred into a haze of endurance. Darian's steps faltered only once, when a hidden root snagged his boot, but he caught himself, his breath ragged against her ear. "Hold on," he whispered, not to her, but to the night itself, as if commanding the shadows to yield. Lysen's mind wandered through the pain, fragments of her exile resurfacing like ghosts in the snow. The iron claws turned backs, the elders' dying eyes pleading for a healing that never came. She had been their light, then their curse. Now she was nothing, her gift extinguished in a fool's mercy. Yet here, pressed against this broken king, she felt a spark, not of power, but of something rawer, a shared fracture in the soul. They emerged from the ravine at dawn's hesitant edge, the sky bleeding pale blue into the white expanse. Before them loomed the Veil Crag Caves, a network of ice-veined hollows carved by forgotten glaciers, sacred to the lunar pilgrims of old. Darian knew them well. As Alpha King, he had sought solace here after battles that left his hands stained with more than blood. Decisions that haunted him, like the purge of the Emberpack traitors, where mercy might have spared a brother's life. He guided her inside. The entrance a yawning maw framed by hoarfrost, where the air turned still and ancient, scented with mineral dampness and the faint, earthy rot of hidden springs. Within, the cave unfolded into chambers lit by shafts of light piercing the ceiling, illuminating walls etched with faded runes, symbols of the Deuce's watchful eye, crescents intertwined with thorns. Darian lowered her onto a ledge of smooth stone, its chill seeping through her cloak like a lover's indifferent touch. He kindled a fire from scavenged tinder, the flames leaping to life with a soft roar, casting golden flickers across his scarred features. His side wound wept anew, but he ignored it, kneeling to tend hers first. With gentle insistence, he unwound the bandage, revealing the gash. A jagged line of inflamed flesh, the silver's poison leaving a silvery sheen beneath the skin, like moonlight trapped in a wound. Lysen watched him, her breath shallow, as he cleaned it with water from a nearby trickle, his fingers surprisingly tender for one forged in war. "You saved my life," he said, not looking up, his voice threading through the crackle of the fire. "An Omega, alone in these peaks. Why risk it?" The question hung, heavy as the cave's silence, stirring the embers of her isolation. She traced the new scar with her eyes, feeling its permanence, a mark that mirrored the crescent on her palm, but twisted, profane. The silver blade had not just cut her, it had severed her from the Deuce's grace, leaving her adrift in a body that no longer sang with healing light. "I saw the blade," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse from the cold and cries. "It was meant for more than flesh, for a legacy." Her words surprised her, drawn out by the vulnerability in his posture, the way his shoulders sagged, burdened by the crown he wore like a shroud. Darian met her gaze then, and in that storm-gray depth she glimpsed the guilt, the fallen allies, the wars waged for a throne stained by his father's betrayals. He was no untouchable king, but a man haunted, his ethics a fragile dam against the tide of duty. Empathy bloomed unbidden, a warmth uncoiling in her chest despite the ache. He bound the wound afresh, his touch lingering a fraction too long, as if testing the boundary between savior and stranger. Outside, the wind howled, a reminder of the enemies circling, the Storm Ridge assassins, perhaps allied with whispers from her own exiled pack. They were bound now, not by choice, but by the fragile sanctuary of this cave where the fire's glow wove their shadows into one. Lysen felt the shift, subtle as the moon's pull on the tide. Fear yielding to curiosity, isolation fracturing under the weight of shared peril. In his presence, her rejection felt less like a sentence, more like a path leading here, to this moment of quiet defiance. As the flames steadied, casting long dances on the rune-carved walls, a tentative bond stirred, forged not in passion, but in the raw honesty of wounds laid bare. The silver scar on her arm gleamed faintly, a symbol of the price paid, whispering of redemptions yet to unfold. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The fire's glow etched fleeting maps of warmth across the cave's rune-scarred walls, but the chill lingered like an uninvited specter, seeping into Lysenne's bones as surely as the silver's poison threaded her veins. She shifted on the stone ledge, the new bandage a tight vice around her arm, muffling the relentless throb but not the deeper ache. The hollow where her gift had once bloomed, now a barren winter field. Darian sat across from her, his broad frame silhouetted against the flames, methodically sharpening his sword with a whetstone that sang a low, rhythmic dirge. The metallic scrape blended with the distant drip of melting ice, a fragile symphony in their sanctuary. His side wound, hastily bound, darkened the edge of his tunic, yet he betrayed no weakness, his storm-gray eyes fixed on the blade as if it held the answers to the betrayals that hounded him. Outside, the wind's howl grew insistent, a mournful chorus that rattled the cave's mouth like bones in a gale. Lysenne's senses, sharpened by exile's solitude, caught the shift before the sounds confirmed it. The crunch of snow under deliberate pause, the faint, acrid scent of foreign pack musk wafting on the draft. Stormridge hunters, not the sleek assassins of the night before, but their brutish enforcers, drawn by the blood scent that no cave could fully conceal. She tensed, her uninjured hand instinctively reaching for the dagger at her belt, a meager relic from her Ironclaw days, its hilt worn smooth by desperate grips. "They come," she whispered, her voice a threadbare veil over the fear coiling in her gut. Not just for him, she realized with a jolt. The Omega in her, marked by rejection, was prey as much as the king. Her pack's whispers of her failed mercy had spread like frost on glass. To the Stormridge, she was a loose thread to unravel, a witness to their silver-forged ambitions. Darian's head snapped up, his gaze locking onto the entrance with predatory focus. He rose in a fluid motion, sword in hand, the runes on his armor catching the firelight in prismatic shards. "Stay back," he commanded, but there was no bark in it, only the quiet steel of one who had led too many into the fray. Lysenne ignored him, pushing to her feet despite the dizziness that swam at the edges of her vision. The silver scar burned anew, a silvery vein pulsing under her skin like a living curse, reminding her of the blade she had claimed. It was her mark now, this twisted crescent mirroring the one on her palm, binding her to a fate she hadn't chosen. She wouldn't cower. Exile had taught her that shadows offered no true refuge. The first enforcer breached the threshold, a hulking figure cloaked in storm-gray furs, his eyes gleaming yellow in the dim light. Behind him, two more slunk in, their breaths fogging the air like predatory mist. They were no subtle killers. These were the Stormridge's vanguard, claws extended and fangs bared, reeking of wet earth and malice. "The Frosthelm bleeds," the leader snarled, his voice a guttural rumble that echoed off the ice. And his Omega whore with him. The throne calls for Silver's kiss. His gaze raked over Lysenne, dismissing her as chattel, but she felt the undercurrent of recognition, the Ironclaw's outcast, ripe for exploitation in their war games. Darian met the charge head-on, his sword a whirlwind of frost-etched fury. Steel clanged against claw, sparks illuminating the cave in staccato bursts, the air thickening with the tang of sweat and singed fur. He was a tempest, every strike precise, born of battles that had forged him into legend, yet the numbers pressed him. A slash grazed his shoulder, reopening his wound in a fresh bloom of red. Lysenne's heart hammered, not from the violence alone, but from the raw vulnerability it exposed. This king, burdened by guilt over purges past, fought not just for survival, but for a realm he doubted his right to rule. She moved then, instinct overriding the silver's drag on her limbs. Her dagger found the flank of the second enforcer as he lunged for Darian's back, the blade sinking shallow but true, drawing a yelp that shattered the din. The leader whirled on her, his massive paw swiping wide, claws whistling through the air. She dodged, the wind of it ruffling her hair, and countered with a kick to his knee, her healer's knowledge guiding the strike to the joint's fragile give. Pain lanced her arm, but she pressed on, grabbing a loose shard of ice from the floor, jagged and cold as retribution, and drove it into his thigh. He roared, staggering, and Darian finished him with a thrust that ended in a wet crunch. The last enforcer fled into the storm, his howls swallowed by the blizzard's roar, leaving the cave a tableau of blood and breath. Panting, they stood amid the aftermath, the fire sputtering as if in exhaustion. Darian turned to her, blood streaking his face like war paint, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that stripped away the king's armor. "You fought," he said, not in praise, but in quiet wonder, as if seeing her anew, not as savior or stray, but as equal in the fray. Lysen met his gaze, the silver scar throbbing in rhythm with her pulse, a bridge between their wounds. The empathy that had flickered in the night's rescue now deepened, roots sinking into shared soil. His guilt over lives he couldn't spare, her rejection for powers that failed. In protecting him, she had shielded a fragment of herself, the belief that mercy, even flawed, could forge something unbreakable. He stepped closer, the heat of him cutting through the cave's chill, and gently touched the edge of her bandage, his fingers rough yet reverent. "We are hunted together now," he murmured, the words heavy with implication. The bond stirred, not as a sudden flame, but as embers kindling in the dark, curiosity yielding to trust, fear transmuting into alliance. Outside, the storm raged, a veil against the world, but within these walls, under the Deuce's rune-shadowed watch, they found a fragile peace. Lysen felt it in the steady cadence of his breath, syncing with hers. In the way the silver scar seemed less a curse and more a sigil of their intertwined fates. Yet doubt whispered, could a broken Omega and a guilt-ridden king truly defy the pack's machinations, or would their refuge become a tomb? The fire crackled on, casting their shadows as one against the ice, while the wind beyond carried the promise of greater tempests. In that suspended breath, Lysen pondered the philosophy etched in blood and frost. What was strength, if not choosing to stand beside the wounded, even when the blade's echo still rang? The cave's depths seemed to pulse with the aftermath of violence, the air thick with the iron tang of spilled blood and the acrid smoke of the dying fire. Lysen leaned against the rune-etched wall, her body a map of aches, the silver scar on her arm throbbing like a distant drum, its twisted crescent glowing faintly in the dim light filtering through cracks in the ice ceiling. The enforcers' corpses lay strewn like fallen sentinels, their fur matted with crimson, but the victory felt hollow, a fragile truce in a war that clawed at their heels. Darian knelt by the flames, his hands stained anew as he rifled through the intruder's pouches, unearthing a silver amulet etched with storm-ridged sigils, a serpent coiled around a fractured moon. He crushed it in his fist, the metal grinding like brittle bone, his storm-gray eyes shadowed by the weight of revelations unspoken. Lysen watched him, her breath steadying as the adrenaline ebbed, leaving her adrift in the quiet. The silver's poison had stolen her healing touch, leaving her hands cold and inert, fingers that once wove life now trembling with futility. Yet, in the fray, something had stirred, not the familiar warmth of mercy, but a sharper intuition, a whisper threading through the chaos like moonlight-piercing storm clouds. She had anticipated the enforcer's swipe, seen the arc of his claw before it fell, guided her dagger with a certainty born of vision, not mere instinct. It unnerved her, this new undercurrent, as if the Deusa had traded one gift for another, forging her scar into a key rather than a lock. Darian rose, his silhouette towering against the fire's renewed flicker, and approached her with the deliberate grace of one who measured every step against the ghosts of his past. Guilt etched his features deeper now, lines carved by the purge of the Ember Pack years ago, a brother's betrayal that had forced his hand, spilling blood he still washed in vain under lunar rites. "You moved like the wind itself," he said, his voice a low rumble that resonated in the chamber's hollows. He extended a hand, not to command, but to offer, pulling her gently to her feet. Their fingers brushed, and in that contact, Lysen felt it again. A surge, not of healing, but of sight. Flashes pierced her mind. Darian's armored form on a throne of ice, besieged by shadows. A path through the whispering peaks, veiled in fog, leading to a hidden temple where the Deus's true seers slumbered. His own wound, not just flesh, but a curse woven by Silver's treachery, binding his line to endless war. She gasped, pulling away, the visions receding like tide from shore, leaving her knees weak. The silver scar burned brighter, its glow sinking with her pulse, a beacon in the gloom. What is this? She whispered, clutching her arm, the twisted crescent now alive with an inner light, silver veins threading outward like roots seeking soil. Outside, the blizzard howled, wind lashing the entrance with fists of snow, but within, the air grew charged, heavy with the scent of ozone and ancient stone, as if the cave itself held its breath. Darian's eyes widened, recognition dawning like dawn over frost peaks. He had heard the old lore in the Frosthelm archives, tales of pathfinders, omegas marked by the Dusa, not for mending bodies, but for illuminating destinies, their scars forged in sacrifice, becoming compasses for the lost. His mother, the late Queen Elowyn, had spoken of them in hushed tones before her own silver-forged end. Rare souls who could unravel the threads of fate, guiding alphas through the moral labyrinths of power and compassion. The scar, he murmured, tracing its edge with a reverence that belied his warrior's calluses. It chose you. The silver didn't destroy your gift, it transformed it. You are the pathfinder, Lysen, the one who sees beyond the blade's edge. Her mind reeled, the weight of it crashing like an avalanche. Exile had stripped her of one purpose, rejection branding her as failure, yet here, in this king's gaze, she glimpsed redemption's cruel poetry. The visions returned unbidden as he spoke, clearer now. A betrayal in the heart of his court, a rival alpha, Lord Varen of the Stormridge, poisoning alliances with whispers of Darian's weak mercy, the same guilt that chained him, and woven through it her role, a light to pierce the fog, revealing the path to unity or ruin. But doubt clawed at her. Was this destiny or delusion? The Deus's symbols adorned the walls, crescents entwined with paths of thorns, mocking her with their permanence. I am no seer, she protested, her voice fracturing like thin ice. I am broken, cast out for what I could not heal. This is the poison's lie. He stepped closer, the heat of his body a counterpoint to the cave's chill, his scent of pine and blood enveloping her like a cloak. Every wound tells a truth, he replied, his tone laced with the melancholy of one who had stared into duty's abyss. Mine binds me to a throne built on my father's sins, wars waged for glory, leaving pacts shattered. Yours, it frees us both. If you see the paths, then show me. The storm ridge closes in. Without clarity, my realm falls to Silver's shadow. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing a tear she hadn't felt fall, the touch igniting the scar's glow anew. Empathy surged between them, a bridge of shared fracture. His ethical torment over lives unspared, her despair at powers redefined. In his eyes, she saw not a king demanding fealty, but a man seeking absolution, recognizing her as the key to his unraveling fate. Lysen closed her eyes, surrendering to the pull. The visions flooded, a fork in the peaks, one path leading to war's maw, rivers of blood under a blood moon, the other to the lunar temple, where a ritual of forgiveness could bind pacts in truce, if mercy prevailed over vengeance. But the cost, her blood spilled in Silver's name, to seal the right. She opened her eyes, meeting his, the silver scar pulsing like a shared heartbeat. "The path to peace demands sacrifice," she breathed, the words tasting of frost and fire. "Not yours alone, but ours. Power or compassion. The choice is yours, but I am the light that reveals it." Darian's breath caught, the realization etching finality into his features. She was no mere savior. She was the Deuce's arrow, aimed at his heart's hidden wars. The bond deepened, resisted no longer, rationalized as duty, accepted as destiny's quiet roar. Yet in that revelation, a dilemma bloomed. Could he lead her into the storm of her visions, knowing the silver scar might demand her end? The fire crackled, casting their entwined shadows long across the runes, while the wind beyond whispered of trials yet to come. Strength, Lysen pondered in the silence, was not in the blade's swing, but in embracing the path that scarred the soul. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your scars as stars. The storm's fury had ebbed to a sullen murmur outside the Veilcrag caves, leaving the world beyond shrouded in a hush of fresh-fallen snow that muffled even the wind's lament. Lysen stood at the chamber's threshold, her silver scar a faint luminescence against the pale dawn filtering through the ice-veined entrance, its twisted crescent now a constant companion, whispering visions that tugged at her like invisible reins. The air hung heavy with the scent of charred wood and lingering blood, the fire reduced to glowing embers that cast elongated shadows across the rune-etched walls. Darian lingered behind her, his presence a solid warmth at her back, his breath steady but laced with the undercurrent of resolve forged in sleepless hours. They had spoken little since the revelation, words inadequate against the weight of paths unveiled, wars, crimson rivers, or the temple's fragile truce, each demanding a piece of their scarred souls. "We move at first light," he had said earlier, his voice threading through the cave's stillness like a blade sheathed in velvet. But light had come, and with it, the pull of destiny sharpened into urgency. Lysen's mind replayed the visions. The fork in the whispering peaks, one trail descending into the storm-ridged strongholds where Lord Varen plotted under banners of fractured moons, his silver-forged ambitions a venom seeping into fractured alliances. The other ascended to the lunar temple, a sanctum of ancient ice and starlit altars where the Deuce's seers had once bound pacts in oaths of blood and mercy. To reach it meant confronting the ghosts of their pasts, her Ironclaw kin, twisted by exile's bitterness, his court riddled with the traitors who echoed his father's sins. The silver scar pulsed, a reminder that her sight was no gentle guide, but a mirror reflecting choices, forgiveness to heal the realm, or vengeance to claim fleeting power. They emerged into the blinding white, the snow crunching underfoot like brittle bones, the cold a living entity that clawed at exposed skin. Darian led, his sword at his side, armor dusted with frost that caught the weak sun in prismatic glints. Lysen followed, her steps measured, the wound in her arm a dull ache overshadowed by the scar's insistent glow. The peaks rose around them, jagged sentinels under a sky bruised with lingering clouds, the wind carrying faint howls, pursuers or echoes of the wild. It mattered little. Her visions guided them now, fragments unfolding like petals in the frost, a narrow pass ahead, veiled in mist, where betrayal waited not as shadow, but as familiar faces. The pass narrowed as they climbed, the air thinning to a razor edge that sliced each breath. Pines gave way to sheer cliffs, their faces scarred by avalanches long past, and the path twisted into a defile where echoes amplified every footfall. Lysen's heart quickened, the silver scar flaring hot as a new vision seized her. Ironclaw banners fluttering in the wind, her former pack amassed not in exile's isolation, but in alliance with Varen's forces, their alpha, Garrick, the one who had banished her, standing at the forefront, his eyes burning with the same suspicion that had cast her out. "They come for you," she murmured, halting Darian with a touch on his arm. His muscles tensed beneath her fingers, the contact sending a jolt through her, a shared pulse. Empathy woven into the bond that had grown from refuge's embers. He turned, storm-gray eyes searching hers, the guilt that haunted him surfacing like blood in snow. "Your kin?" The word carried the weight of his own fractures. The Emberpack purge, where Mercy's hesitation had cost him a brother's life, leaving him to rule a throne built on regret. Lysen nodded, the cold seeping deeper as the howls grew distinct, a chorus rising from the mist below. They were not strangers. They were the past incarnate, drawn by Varen's promises of reclamation, willing to trade her failed blood for a seat at the king's downfall. The ambush erupted without warning, figures bursting from hidden crevices like specters unchained. Garrick led them, his form bulkier than memory, fur cloak stained with the mud of hurried marches, his face a mask of righteous fury under the pale light. Flanking him were Ironclaws she had once called family, Alara, the beta who had shared her herbs, Thorn's nephew, eyes hollow with the Elder's unresolved curse, and woven among them, Storm Ridge warriors, their silver amulets glinting like promises of death. "Traitor Omega!" Garrick snarled, his voice booming off the cliffs, claws extended as he advanced. "You meddle with kings now? The Deusa marked you false. We'll end the lie and claim Varen's boon." Darian stepped forward, sword drawn in an arc that sang through the frigid air, positioning himself between her and the onslaught. "She is under my protection," he growled. The words a vow etched in frost, his ethics flaring against the tide of aggression. The clash began in chaos, claws raking armor, steel meeting fang in bursts of red mist that painted the snow. Lysen dodged a swipe from Alara, the beta's eyes flickering with conflicted pain, and drove her dagger into a Storm Ridge flank, the silver scar guiding her strike with preternatural clarity. But Garrick broke through, lunging for Darian with a roar that shook the pass, his blow glancing off the king's guard, but forcing him back toward the edge. In the melee's heart, Lysen's visions fractured into moral crucibles. Forgive Garrick's betrayal, reveal Varen's deeper treachery, a forged letter binding Ironclaws to Silver's curse, dooming them all, or unleash the path to war, where Darian's blade could shatter the alliance in blood. Love or liberty, the bond with the king pulled at her, a tenderness born in pain, urging compassion over the freedom of vengeance. She could flee, reclaim her solitude, or stand, her sight illuminating the choice that might redeem them both. "Garrick!" she cried, voice cutting through the din like moonlight on ice. "Varen lies. He twists the Deuce's will. Your pack's curse is his silver, not my failure." He faltered, paw raised mid-strike, eyes locking on hers with a flicker of doubt. Darian pressed the advantage, disarming a Storm Ridge with a sweep that sent Silver clattering into the abyss. But the king hesitated too, his blade hovering, guilt's shadow, remembering the brother he had slain in similar fury. The air thickened with the scent of blood and sweat, Uivos echoing from the cliffs as more reinforcements bayed in the distance. Lysen's scar burned, visions converging. Forgiveness could fracture Varen's web, binding Garrick to their side, but at the cost of her blood in the temple rite, sealing the truce with sacrifice. War promised survival, her liberty intact, but the realms fall in rivers of red. Garrick lunged again, but slower, torn, and Darian parried, not killing, but pinning him against the rock. "Choose," the king demanded, breath ragged, his gaze flicking to Lysen, a silent plea, his melancholy ethics demanding not domination, but the mercy he had long denied himself. She stepped forward, the wind whipping her cloak like wings, the silver scar a radiant sigil against the gathering storm. In that suspended clash, under the moon's distant watch, the dilemma crystallized. power through slaughter, or compassion's fragile crown. Her heart, entwined with his, whispered of renascimento, but the past's claws dug deep, forcing the scale to tip. Blood dripped from a fresh graze on Darian's arm, mingling with snow, and Lysen wondered if strength lay in the forgiveness that scarred anew, or the liberty that left all bleeding alone. The past trembled with the weight of unspoken oaths, the first flakes of renewed snow falling like judgments from the indifferent sky. The snowflakes thickened into a veil, blurring the edges of the defile where blood had already begun to freeze in dark petals against the stone. Lysen's breath came in shallow bursts. The silver scar on her arm, a searing brand that illuminated the chaos not with light, but with the cruel clarity of choices unmade. Garrick's form loomed before her, pinned by Darian's blade against the sheer cliff face, his chest heaving like bellows in a forge gone cold. The Ironclaw Alpha's eyes, once familiar with the warmth of pack fires, now burned with a fractured fury, suspicion warring with the seed of doubt her words had planted. Around them, the skirmish hung suspended, Ilara and the others circling like shadows reluctant to strike, their howls silenced by the wind's relentless dirge. The air reeked of iron and frost, the metallic bite mingling with the pine-sharp scent of Darian's proximity, his body a barrier between her and the past that clawed its way back. She stepped closer, the crunch of snow under her boots a solitary rhythm in the tense hush, her cloak whipping around her like the Deuce's indifferent shroud. The silver scar pulsed, visions cascading through her mind's eye. Varen's serpentine grin in a throne room of fractured ice, forging letters with silver ink that bound the Ironclaws to his treason, promising them Lysen's head as the price for their allegiance. It was no mere rivalry. It was a web spun from the king's own guilt, exploiting the purges Darian had enacted, the Emberpack's fall, where Mercy's delay had spilled brotherly blood, leaving scars that Varen twisted into weapons. Forgive, the scar urged, and the path to the lunar temple opened, a ritual of blood oaths that could mend the realms, her sacrifice the seal. Or war, shatter them now, grant her the liberty to vanish into exile's embrace, but doom the packs to silver's endless cycle, rivers of red under a blood moon that drowned all redemption. Garrick, Lysen said again, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs, carrying over the wind like a prayer etched in frost. The curse that took Elder Thorn, it wasn't my failure. Varen's silver taints the roots. He poisoned the waters of our valley, blaming the Deuce's will to turn you against me. I see it now, clear as moonlight on snow. Join us, or bleed for his lies. Her words hung, fragile as the first thaw, stirring memories in the Alpha's gaze, the nights she had tended his wounds with hands that glowed, the pack's reverence before suspicion's frost had claimed it. Ilara shifted, her beta's loyalty fracturing, a low whine escaping her throat as the vision's truth echoed in her own conflicted heart. Darian's grip on his sword tightened, the runes along the blade flickering with inner frost, but he held, his storm-gray eyes flicking to Lysen with a depth that pierced her soul. In him, she saw the mirror of her dilemma. His ethics, that melancholic compass forged in guilt, demanded he spare Garrick as he had not spared his brother, yet duty roared for the kill, to end the threat and claim power unyielding. Their bond thrummed between them, no longer resisted but rationalized as the Deuce's thread, love not as reward, but as the trial that tested freedom against unity. He was broken by the throne's weight, every decision a echo of losses unhealed. She, by rejection's blade, now wielded sight that bound her to his fate. To choose forgiveness meant chaining her liberty to his side, walking the path where her blood might yet flow in the temple's right. War offered escape, the Omega's solitude reclaimed, but at the cost of his soul's further fracture, the realms crumbling under Silver's shadow. Garrick snarled, twisting against the blade. But the doubt rooted deeper, his claws retracting fractionally as Varen's forged letter burned in Lysen's vision. Its words a venomous script, The Omega's mercy failed, claim her end, and the frost helm crown yields. He spat blood-flecked snow, eyes locking on hers with the raw pain of betrayal's reflection. You were our light, Lysen, then darkness took thorn, and you stood empty-handed. Varen swore it was your curse that silver would cleanse it. His voice cracked. The Alpha's facade crumbling like ice under sun, revealing the shame of his banishment. A choice born of desperation, not cruelty, to appease the pack's fear. The wind howled louder, carrying distant weavos from the Stormridge reinforcements, a tide rising to drown them all. Alara dropped to her knees, tears freezing on her furred cheeks, and the others murmured, the alliance fracturing like glass under pressure. Lysen's scar flared, the twisted crescent weaving final clarity. Forgiveness here would turn Garrick, rally the Ironclaws to the temple's path, but demand her public stand, exposing the silver's mark as Deuce's will, risking recapture by those who saw her as traitor still. Liberty whispered temptation. Slip away in the melee. Let Darian's blade decide, her visions unshared, her heart unburdened by the king's melancholy pull. Yet the bond resisted severance. In his glance, she felt the tenderness born of shared pain, the ethical fire that mirrored her own. What was love, if not the choice to heal the unhealable, even when it scarred deeper? Darian lowered his sword an inch, the motion a silent yielding to her light. His voice a gravelly murmur amid the storm. The past bleeds us all, Garrick. I know its taste. Brothers lost to blades I wielded, thrones stained by mercy's hesitation. But Varen's silver poisons more than flesh. It twists oaths into chains. Choose with us, or fall alone. The words carried his guilt like an offering, the Alpha King's melancholy laid bare, ethics demanding compassion over conquest. Garrick's shoulders sagged, the fight ebbing as truth's frost settled, and he nodded once, ragged and raw, the Ironclaws shifting allegiance in murmurs that blended with the wind. But victory's echo rang hollow. Reinforcements crested the ridge, silver glinting in their paws, Varen's banner unfurling like a serpent's coil. The choice crystallized in Lysen's chest, a vice of moral fire. Forgiveness bound her to the path of sacrifice, love entwining with Darian's fate in the temple's shadowed rite, her blood the price for realms reborn. Or war, unleash the fray, claim freedom's cold solitude, but watch the king's light dim under guilt's renewed weight, the Deuce's threads severed in crimson. The silver scar burned, a spiritual forge testing her soul as the first clash renewed, blades singing through snow. In that visceral storm, under the sky's bruised gaze, Lysen pondered the philosophy carved in wind and blood. Was redemption found in the mercy that chained the heart, or the liberty that left it forever wandering alone? The answer clawed at her, unresolved, as the battle raged toward its ethical precipice. The defile erupted into a maelstrom of fang and steel, the snow churning into a bloody slurry under the relentless advance of Varen's reinforcements. Lysen's world narrowed to the silver scar's fevered pulse, its twisted crescent a forge hammering choices into irrevocable form. Mercy's chain or liberty's blade, each path etched in the wind's savage howl. Garrick fought at Darian's side now, his iron claws turning like a tide against the Stormridge horde, but the numbers swelled, silver amulets flashing like malevolent stars amid the fray. Claws raked the air, drawing arcs of red that steamed in the frigid gusts, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the sharp bite of pine shattered by impacts. Darian moved like a tempest incarnate, his sword a blur of frost-rimed fury, yet every parry bore the weight of his guilt, a hesitation born of brothers lost to similar storms. Lysen dodged a lunging Stormridge warrior, her dagger sinking into his shoulder with the scar's guiding clarity, visions fracturing around her. The lunar temple's altar, slick with sacrificial blood under a full moon's gaze, where oaths could bind the packs in fragile unity. Her blood, spilled there to seal the rite, the silver scar's essence invoking the Diusa's mercy, would cure the poison's deeper curse, not just on Darian's line, but on the realms fractured by silver's betrayal. Union with him, this melancholic king whose ethics mirrored her own scarred faith, demanded that sacrifice, her life woven into his redemption, love proving itself not as reward, but as the ultimate proof of compassion over power. Yet liberty sang counterpoint, a siren's whisper in the chaos, flee the melee, vanish into the peak's white labyrinth, her visions unshared, heart unbound by the tenderness that had bloomed in caves' embers and refuges quiet. Exile anew, but chosen, free from destiny's yoke. A silver-tipped spear whistled toward Darian's back, Varen's banner-bearer charging through the press, his eyes wild with the promise of throne's vacancy. Time splintered. Lysen surged forward, the wind tearing at her cloak like jealous claws, intercepting the thrust with her body. The point grazed her side, not deep, but searing. Silver's kiss blooming fresh crimson through her tunic, warm rivulets tracing paths down her chilled skin. Pain exploded, visceral and intimate, the scar flaring in symphony. But she held, wrenching the spear free and driving her knee into the attacker's gut. He crumpled, howling as Darian whirled, his face a mask of horror paling against the snow. "No more!" he roared, the sound a thunderclap that stilled the nearest fray, his sword cleaving the banner-bearer in a single, mercy-denied stroke. The storm ridge faltered, Garrick's forces pressing the advantage, but Darian's gaze locked on her wound, the blood, her blood, staining the white drifts like a profane sacrament. Guilt ravaged his features, deeper than any purge's echo. His hand reaching to staunch the flow with trembling fingers, the heat of his palm a stark contrast to the cold seeping from the gash. "You bleed for me again," he murmured, voice fracturing like ice under strain, the king's melancholy unraveling into raw despair. In that touch, their bond ignited fully, resisted no longer, rationalized as the Diusa's inexorable weave, accepted as the fire that tempered their fractures into one. The battle's tide turned in that suspended breath, iron claws and frost helms united against the silver tide, Varen's forces breaking under the onslaught, fleeing into the storm with howls of defeat. Garrick nodded to Lysen across the bloodied snow, a silent absolution for exile's wound, his pack's faith reborn in her light. But victory's hush brought no peace. The silver spear's graze had awakened the scar's full demand, visions converging on the temple's right, her blood freely given to invoke the Diusa's cure, not just for Darian's cursed line, but for the realm's poisoned oaths, silver's bane transmuted into unity's seal. Sacrifice or survival, the moral precipice loomed, faith against despair, destiny's pull versus freedom's solitary wind. They pressed on through the peak's unforgiving ascent, the group a ragged procession under the moon's swelling gaze, snow falling in veils that muffled the distant weavos of scattered foes. Lysen leaned on Darian, her steps faltering as the silver's fresh venom gnawed inward. The scar's glow a beacon guiding them to the temple's hidden veil, a cleft in the mountain where ice pillars rose like frozen sentinels, etched with lunar runes that hummed in resonance with her pulse. The air grew thick with spiritual weight, scented of ancient stone and faint ozone, the wind's howl softening to a reverent whisper as they crossed the threshold. Within, the sanctum unfolded, a vast chamber of glacial blue, its ceiling a dome of star-pierced ice, an altar at the center cradling a silver chalice veined with thorns, symbol of the Diusa's trials, mirroring her scar. Darian halted before it, his arms steady around her, storm-gray eyes reflecting the ethereal light. Garrick and the others formed a circle, their breaths fogging in solemn unity, the pack's old wounds laid bare under the moon's judgment. "The path you revealed demands this," he said, his voice a low cadence of ethical resolve, fingers brushing the edge of her wound with a tenderness that belied the warrior's scars. But I cannot ask it. Your blood has bought my life twice. No more will it spill for my throne's shadows. Guilt shadowed him still. The melancholy king who had purged in duty's name, now choosing compassion's crown over power's grasp. Yet Lysen felt the truth in her vision's core. Union required the sacrifice, her silver-marked essence the key to cure the curse that bound him, redeeming rejection into rebirth for all. She pulled away gently, ascending the altar's steps alone, the chalice's chill kissing her palms like a lover's final breath. The scar blazed, silver veins threading across her skin in luminous paths, drawing the gathered packs into hushed awe. "It is not asked," she whispered, meeting Darian's gaze across the sanctum, love's proof etching her features in quiet fire. "It is chosen. For the realms, for the Deusa's weave, for you." With steady hands, she pressed the blade from her dagger, a shard of the very silver that had scarred her, against her palm, slicing deep. Blood welled, rich and vital, dripping into the chalice with soft, resonant plinks that echoed like rebirth's heartbeat. Pain wove through her, visceral and transcendent, the silver's poison inverting in the right, flooding visions of healed oaths, pacts bound not in war, but in mercy's enduring flame. The chalice overflowed, silver light erupting in a cascade that bathed the chamber, seeping into wounds old and new, Darian's side mending with a sigh of released guilt, the curse's chains shattering like frost under sun. He surged forward as she swayed, catching her in arms that vowed silently what words could not. Garrick knelt, the iron claws following. Allegiance sworn under the moon's approving swell. Lysen's vision dimmed, not in death but in renewal, the scar fading to a faint crescent of pure silver. Her gift reborn not as healer, but as unifier, rejection transmuted into destiny's heart. Darian lifted her, his lips brushing her temple in the sanctum's glow, the bond sealed in blood and frost, a union of broken souls, where love proved redemption's quiet roar. "No drop of your blood shall ever spill again," he vowed, voice carrying to the packs like law etched in ice, absolute and unyielding. "By the Deusa and my crown, it is sworn, Lysen Crow, pathfinder of the Frosthelms, shall walk unbloodied, her mercy our realm's eternal guard." The words rippled outward, packs howling in unified chorus, the wind beyond carrying the echo into the night. In that Renascimento, under the moon's benevolent watch, strength revealed itself not in power's grasp, but in compassion's sacrifice, the wound that healed all. Snow fell softly now, blanketing the peaks in promise, as the king carried his Omega into the light of a reborn dawn. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.